Manhattan, 1920. It's 10:30 p.m. and the man is standing in the rain on the corner waiting for someone. He isn't waiting for anyone in particular. Any one of the many people who owe him money will do. And there were many. So many that the odds of one of them passing by him tonight were very high. This man isn't broke, and he doesn't need the money. In his pocket right now is around $100,000 cash, his bankroll, his reason for existing. It's his most precious possession, and he never leaves the house without it. It was the source of his power and respect. He loved his bankroll, and he counted it every night. He would loan some of it out to those in need of quick cash, and he knew what was owed to him down to the penny without writing it down. And if you owed him money, God help you if you didn't pay it back on time. And if he owed you money, well, I'll get it to you when I can. The latter would be his demise. Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today, we're going to finally be talking about Arnold Rothstein, Mr. Big, the fixer, the man uptown, the big bankroll, the brain. There's not another man who had the influence on organized crime in the 20th century that Arnold Rothstein did. He created the floating card game. He invented the floating craps game. He taught Charlie Lucky how to dress and act with class. When Prohibition started, he was the first to import the good booze straight from Europe. He taught Lepke and Gorat how the labor racket should be run. He opened the first heroin pipelines from Germany, and his casino set the standard for the carpet houses run by Frank Costello and Meyer Lansky in the 30s and 40s. When he bet on a boxer, a horse, or a sports team, it made the papers and it changed the odds. Even though he was a small man physically, he loomed large. He wasn't a violent man, but he knew violent men who liked money, and he had plenty of that. It was his idea to organize crime nationwide. They were going to write books and Broadway musicals based on this man who loved money, cake, and milk. Arnold Rothstein was born January 17th, 1882 in Manhattan to Abraham and Esther Rothstein. Arnold was the second of 5 children born to the Rothsteins, and according to his family, even as a baby, Arnold Rothstein was a serious man. He wasn't playful, didn't smile or laugh. He just observed the world around him with content through the big brown eyes he inherited from his mother. Arnold's father would never fully understand his second son. Abraham Rothstein was a man of honor. He had become wealthy operating a dry goods store and a cotton converting business, and he bought a home for his family on East 79th Street. He was known as Abe the Just, a nickname given to him by Governor Al Smith. Abraham was an Orthodox Jew and raised his kids in the Jewish tradition, but Arnold would never buy into the whole religious thing. He told his father, "I don't care about that stuff. This is America, not Jerusalem. Let Harry be a Jew." Harry was Arnold's older brother. Harry was the good son, the favorite son, and Arnold hated him. One night when Arnold was about 3, Abraham was awakened by noises coming from his boy's room. When he opened the door, he found Arnold standing over Harry with a knife. After Abraham coaxed the knife out of his son's hand, he asked him why. Arnold responded, "I hate Harry." When his mother went on a trip back to her native San Francisco, she only took Harry with her, leaving Arnold and his 3 younger siblings with Abraham. That night, Abraham found Arnold in the closet crying. When his father tried to console him, Arnold said that "she hates me, you hate me, but everyone loves Harry." Arnold would later say in an interview that this was the last time he cried. Arnold felt like he was living in the shadow of his brother. Harry was an excellent student. Arnold was not. And by the time he was in the 5th grade, he had fallen behind 2 years and was in the same class as his younger brother. Arnold hated everything about school except for math. He loved to play with numbers. He was transferred to a Hebrew school where he did even worse. He wasn't stupid, he just didn't care. He found the streets to be more interesting and began to spend more time with the types of people his father wanted him to stay away from. At 9, Arnold was caught shooting craps and brought home to his father by the police officer. When told of his activities, Abraham told Arnold that gambling was a sin, but his words meant nothing. Arnold had already fallen in love with gambling. He was addicted to the excitement, and he said that when he gambled, time stood still and nothing else mattered. He was playing any games he could get into: dice, poker, stuss. At age 14, Arnold started keeping track of his wins and losses. As his wins outgained his losses, his pennies and nickels and dimes grew to dollars, and he kept track of every one of them. Arnold always carried all of his money on him. It made him feel safe and secure. He wasn't the biggest guy, and the streets of Manhattan were not the safest place to be, but Arnold was smart enough to use some of his money to buy some of the toughest kids in the neighborhood treats and keep them on his side. Arnold began to spend his time in pool halls. Now, today we think of a pool hall as a place you play pool. But originally, these were places where lottery tickets were sold and the money collected was called a pool. Winning numbers were announced in the evening, so to give gamblers something to do while they waited, billiard tables were installed. The men changed the rules and added pockets to the table, creating the game we know now as pool. Arnold would spend much of his youth in these places. He became an excellent pool player and would use this hustle to increase his bankroll. He was even hired by one pool hall to represent them against any challenges. Arnold's father had a gold pocket watch that he would keep in a drawer. Arnold would wait till his father left, take the watch, and pawn it for money to gamble. But he always returned the watch before his father got home. By the age of 16, Arnold was done with school. He would finish his education in the streets. In addition to his pool hustle, he frequented Lower East Side stuss houses and began to hang around a weekly crack game held at Hammerstein's Victoria Theater at 42nd and 7th. He wouldn't gamble, but he loaned money to those who wanted to. He would loan $4 in exchange for $5, due the next week. Arnold was small and not intimidating, so some men felt that they didn't have to pay the little guy back. These games were frequented by some of the toughest guys in New York. Guys like Herman Beansy Rosenthal, Dago Frank Serafici, Whitey Lewis, and Edward Osterman, known as Monk Eastman. Monk was the leader of the Eastman Gang, the gang of Jewish gangsters that controlled the Lower East Side. Arnold befriended Monk and hired him to collect from the people who owed him money. Needless to say, Arnold began to be paid on time. Arnold realized the power of money. He saw that those with money had power and respect, and he set his sights to become one of those with power and respect. But first he needed the money. By the age of 16, Arnold's bankroll was over $500. He was noticed by Big Tim Sullivan, Tammany bigwig and political leader of the Bowery, as an up-and-comer. Sullivan took young Arnold under his wing. Arnold began to hang around Sullivan and run errands for him. By the age of 17, Arnold moved from his parents' house and got a job as a traveling salesman for a hat company. When he was 18, he was on the road and received the news that his older brother Harry had died suddenly of pneumonia. Arnold rushed home, but by the time he arrived, Harry's funeral was over. He moved back into the family home and mourned his brother with his family. In some way, he felt like he needed to replace Harry. But soon he realized that he would never be Harry in his parents' eyes. And after a few months, Arnold moved back out. He would never return. He got another job as a cigar salesman until he saved up $2,000, and then he quit to start his career as a professional gambler. His bankroll grew steadily. By 1904, it was $5,000. He gambled, loaned money, and invested in legitimate business. Soon, Arnold got the nod from Big Tim Sullivan to open a pool house of his own. He would hold card games and paid off from horse races when the results came in. It was this operation that got Arnold's name in the newspapers for the first time. On January 1st, 1907, police raided an apartment at 112 West 40th Street. When the police tried to enter, Arnold held the door and tried to prevent them from doing so. Eventually, they forced their way in. They found the floor littered with racing forms. Arnold told the cops that this was his apartment and the men just came by for an informal game of pinochle. His cover was blown when the phone rang. An officer answered it, and the man on the other end gave the results of the first race in New Orleans. Arnold was arrested and charged with operating a pool room. This was just a hiccup. His connections with Big Tim Sullivan got him off. His bankroll was now $12,000. Arnold loved to gamble, and he would gamble on anything. He would bet $100 that the next person to get off the trolley was a man or a woman. He loved to gamble, but he loved to win even more, and he tried to never bet on a game he couldn't control. Before he bet on a horse, he would do extensive research on the horse, its owner, trainers, and the jockey who was going to ride it. He took the same due diligence to his love life. In 1907, Arnold met a 19-year-old actress named Carolyn Green at a party. He was instantly attracted to her and asked her out on a date. After several dates, he ended all communications abruptly. He began to ask around town about her, and once he was satisfied with the information, he had a mutual friend ask her to join him for dinner. When she arrived, Arnold was at the table by himself. She had heard about his snooping and was not happy. "How dare you go around asking people about me?" He smiled and said, "I think a man should know everything about the woman he plans to marry." On April 12, 1909, Arnold and Carolyn were married in Saratoga, New York. Arnold had been going to Saratoga every summer when the racing season started, and in 1909, Arnold won $12,000 during the season, and he decided to open his own gambling house with Willie Shea, another protege of Big Tim Sullivan. In 1910, the legend of Arnold Rothstein took flight. Although he had many streams of income, he still loved the thrill of playing pool, and he was still one of the best players in the city, if not the country. John Conaway was a professional jockey from Philadelphia, and he was the pool champion of the Philadelphia Racket Club. Several New York sportsmen who had no love for Arnold decided that they wanted to take him and his bankroll down a few notches. Conway was present at a party when he was introduced to Arnold as possibly the best pool player in the country. Arnold scoffed. "You're wrong about that," he said. "Well, who do you think can beat him?" said the sportsman. Arnold pulled out his bankroll and peeled off $500. "I can beat Mr. Conaway." The match was set for January 20th, 1910 at McGraw's Billiard Room. It started at 8 p.m. The first game was for 50 points and Conaway won. Arnold paid and asked for a rematch. The next game was for 100 points, and Arnold won that barely. Arnold won the next game, and the next game, and the next game. By 2 a.m., the time that the bar was supposed to close, Conaway was down several $100s. He offered to tip the workers $25 each to stay for a few more hours. By the next afternoon, the game was still going on, and Conaway was playing every game for double or nothing, trying to recoup his losses. After almost 30 hours of play, without stopping to eat anything but a few bites from sandwiches, the two men were woozy and could hardly see the balls, but neither man would yield. At 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, McGraw said that the game would have to end. It would be another 2 hours before the pair retired their cues and piled into a car and were driven to a Turkish bath. Arnold's reputation was intact, and his bankroll grew. Arnold's gambling den was on 46th Street, and during the time of reform in New York, his place remained open when others were shut down. He had the backing of Big Tim Sullivan, yes, but he also made sure that when important people came to gamble, they won. This did not sit well with his partner, William Shea. On November 10th, the son of a wealthy businessman, Charles Gates, came to New York. He was in the mood to gamble, and he was steered to Arnold's game by one of the many pretty women Arnold employed for that purpose. By the morning, Gates was down 40 grand. He wrote a check, but Arnold didn't want to take any chances. So William Shea accompanied Mr. Gates to the bank when it opened. He secured the 40 grand, but then he disappeared. Arnold went looking for his partner at the Hotel Knickerbocker. When he found him, he demanded an explanation. Shea told him that this was just about covering his losses from Arnold letting his friends work the house. Arnold said okay. He agreed to let Shea keep the money in exchange for the house. Arnold pulled out a pen, and Shea signed over his rights to the business. In 1912, Arnold played a small part in the crime of the century, up to that date at least. Gambler Herman Beansy Rosenthal, another one of the tough Jewish gangsters under Big Tim, opened the gambling house with the permission of Sullivan. One of his partners was Police Lieutenant Charles Becker. Becker was head of a squad charged with raiding gambling houses and made a lot of money looking the other way. After several complaints from the mayor that Beansy Rosenthal's house had not been raided, Becker informed Rosenthal that he would have to stage a raid. There was nothing he could do. Rosenthal refused to accept this and said that he was paying Becker not to be raided. He told Becker that if he was raided, he would go to the papers and expose him. Becker raided his place, and Beansy Rosenthal went to the papers. Tim Sullivan sent Arnold to talk some sense into him. Arnold told Rosenthal that he needed to stop with this foolishness, and he offered them $500 to leave town. Rosenthal told Arnold to go to hell with his $500. But when the expose hit the papers, all hell broke loose. Beansy Rosenthal began to receive death threats, and he knew he had messed up big time. He went back to Arnold and asked for the $500 to leave town. But Arnold had seen the papers too, and he told Beansy, "You're not worth $500 to anyone." At around 1 a.m. on July 16, 1912, Herman Rosenthal was at the Metropole Hotel, reading his story in the newspapers. An hour or so later, he was called outside. When he stepped outside, shots rang out. 3 men opened fire on the stubborn gambler before hopping into a waiting cab and disappearing. Charles Becker was arrested with 5 other men and charged with the murder. It would be the biggest story in the papers until World War I, but that's for another video. Arnold spent the next few years adding to his bankroll. He was the biggest bookmaker in New York, and he was the financial backer for many smaller bookmakers. For the most part, when he gambled, he won. But he couldn't control everything. In 1914, he lost 75 grand when the New York baseball Giants team failed to win the National League pennant. In the fall of 1916, he bet that the Giants would win the World Series in 1917. They did, and he won big. With the city clamping down on gambling, Arnold opened a few houses in Nassau County. And in the city, he invented the floating craps game and the card game. Instead of having one place to hold the game, Arnold would move from hotel to hotel. Only the players knew where it would be held, and the cops didn't have a fixed place to raid. It was a good plan, but it didn't always work. On May 16, 1917, Arnold was holding a crap game at the Hotel Francis on West 47th Street. Arnold had taken many precautions. His suite came with extra locks on the door and a peephole. He paid off all the employees, the bellboy, the elevator operator, the house detective, and the phone receptionist. There had been a string of craps games held up recently, so his precautions were valid. The men began to show up around 11:30. In attendance were several wealthy professionals, a couple of doctors, a couple of attorneys, a theater owner, a few actors, and some professional gamblers. Arnold had his suspicions that one of these gamblers was in cahoots with the stick-up gang. He had been present at all the previous games that were held up. But he had a big bankroll, and Arnold wanted it, and he felt the risk was worth it. The game began around midnight, and there were about 30 men in the suite. 2 hours later, 4 men walked into the hotel lobby. One went right to the clerk and put a gun to his face. The next 2 pulled the guns on the house detective. The elevator operator and the bellhop were corralled. They told the men to be calm and no one would get hurt. They knew that during the games, Arnold would often call down and ask for refreshments to be sent up. The gang waited for the next call. When the call came, the gunman took the elevator up with the bellhop. When they got to the hotel room, the gunman stood flat against the wall on either side of the door. The bellhop knocked. "I have your order." The peephole slid open, but only the bellhop could be seen. When the door was unlocked, the gunmen pushed the bellhop in and followed him in with guns drawn. In a split second, Arnold realized what was going on and he pulled his bankroll out of his pocket and kicked it under a rug. All the while, he kept his eyes locked on the gambler he thought was in league with the thieves. The thieves cleaned the table of the cash, searched the players, and relieved them of their cash, jewels, and watches. When they got to Arnold, they only found $2,600. He was searched twice. All the while, he kept his eyes on the gambler. When one of the thieves took his diamond stick pen, he said, "Don't worry, AR, I'll send you the pawn slip." Arnold replied, "Don't bother, I'll have it back by the morning." When the thieves left, they left with around $20,000. Arnold retrieved his bankroll from under the rug, and as the place cleared out, Arnold asked the gambler he suspected to stick around. "Let's me, you, and Abe go get something to eat." Abe was Abe Patel, former boxing champion and muscle for Arnold. They were the last 3 men to leave. When they got downstairs and everything was clear, Arnold let him go. He wasn't sure if his buddies would be downstairs waiting for him. If they were, the gambler was going to be the first to get it. Arnold took his complaints to the authorities. He was not yet that kind of criminal. When he did so, he was wearing his diamond stick pen. Like he said he would, defense returned it to him the morning after the robbery. Arnold picked career criminals Al Johnson and Gene Price out of the rogues gallery. They were arrested, and at the trial, Arnold took the stand. The 2 were found guilty and sent to Sing Sing. Al Johnson would later escape from jail, and he let it be known that the killing of Arnold Rothstein was top on his list. Arnold was warned by the police, but he refused to let the streets of New York see him as yellow. He went about his business as usual. Al Johnson would eventually be killed later that year by police during a bank robbery in Detroit. When the season opened in Saratoga in 1917, Arnold was approached by old-time gambler Harry Tobin. Tobin had the perfect place to have a casino, but he didn't have the dough to get it going. Arnold made him an offer. He would give him the startup money in exchange for half of the profits made that season. Tobin agreed. Because Arnold had a stake in the business, Tobin used him to steer players to the place. When the season ended, they split $100,000. The next year, it was better. And in 1919, Arnold opened his own casino in Saratoga. He would make the Brook Club the most luxurious casino this side of Monte Carlo. It would become the template for the carpet houses that would be built by men who spent time in Arnold's School of Crime, guys like Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. He would maintain the Brook Club until 1922. When a mayoral candidate who ran on gambling reform won the election, Arnold thought his time in Saratoga was over. A few days after the new mayor was sworn in, a representative from his office came to see Arnold. He told Arnold that the mayor was willing to go back on some of his campaign promises. "How much?" Arnold asked. The representative said that $60,000 would take care of him. Arnold told him to tell the mayor to go to hell. If he was willing to sell out a whole town, he wouldn't think twice about double-crossing me. He put the Brook Club up for sale. On January 19th, 1919, Arnold was holding one of his crap games at 301 West 57th Street. A few weeks before, a group of men had busted into one of his games and robbed him of $11,000, so Arnold was on high alert. Sometime after midnight, the game was halted suddenly when there was a loud bang at the door. Arnold pulled his gun from his waistband. He was not going to be robbed again. The man on the other side of the door yelled, "Open up or we'll break the door down." Arnold raised his arm and shots rang out. Arnold pumped 3 shots through the wooden door. Police officers John Walsh and John McClellan were hit by gunfire, and another had a bullet pass through his overcoat. The men finally busted the door down and announced themselves as police officers. Arnold was captured while trying to flee down the fire escape. He was brought back in and told detectives that he fired through the door because he feared that it was another robbery. Luckily, the 2 officers only had minor injuries. Arnold was arrested and paid his bail, as well as the bail of the other 19 men taken in. In February, he was brought in front of a grand jury. Even though Arnold initially admitted that he fired the gun, the DA could not prove that Arnold was the owner of the gun that was found on the floor in the hotel room. The case was dismissed. And the twist, the officer who approved the raid was himself arrested and charged with corruption. There were rumors going around that the 1918 World Series between the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago Cubs was fixed by gamblers. And everyone in the know knew that the World Series in 1914 was definitely fixed. Major League Baseball was not like it is now. There were no 8-9-figure salaries. The owners made most of the money and the players got the scraps. Charles Comiskey, the owner of the Chicago White Sox, was one of the most miserly. He paid most of his players the league minimum, which was $2,500, and the rest were not making much more than that. There were no free agents. His players were under contract to him, and he kept them under his thumb. "If they don't play for me, they don't play for anyone," he was quoted as saying. His players felt used and underappreciated. In the spring of 19, the players staged a small revolt. They got manager William Kid Gleason to speak with Comiskey about a raise. The answer was a hard no. The Chicago White Sox dominated the 1918-1919 season, and by the end of 19, they were the clear favorites for the pennant. It was pitcher Eddie Seacoat and first baseman Chick Gandil who met with gambler Joseph Sport Sullivan in Boston and told him that the World Series could be thrown for $100,000. Sullivan was game, but he didn't have $100,000. But he knew who did. He said that he would talk to AR. Everyone knew who Arnold Rothstein was, so the players thought it was a done deal. Sullivan took the idea to Arnold. He agreed to finance it. But after not hearing from or being able to get in contact with Sport Sullivan, the players sought out other gamblers to put the fix into play. They met with former major leaguer turned gambler Bill Burns, but he didn't have the dough either. He too said that he would reach out to AR. The problem was he didn't know Arnold, but he had a friend who did. William Marhawk was a former boxer from Philadelphia, and he knew Arnold. He set up a meeting. Arnold knew what the meeting was about. He knew that the series was going to be fixed, and he didn't want any part of the Burns scheme. He had his own thing in motion. But he took the meeting anyway. The meeting was set to take place at the Astor Hotel restaurant. Arnold brought a former police officer along with him to be a witness. During the meeting, Burns pitched the idea of fixing the World Series to Arnold. Loud enough for everyone to hear, Arnold said that he wanted no parts. He called them scoundrels and told them to leave. This was a well-calculated move. Arnold knew that the series was going to be thrown. If it blew back on him, he could say that he told the conspirators emphatically no. A few days later, Burns received a phone call. The person on the other end said that Arnold Rothstein was aboard and Abe Attell, the little champ, would be his go-between. Arnold gave Abe $60,000 to bet, and Abe pawned his wife's wedding ring and placed all the money on the Reds. The day before Game 1 of the series, which was to be held in Cincinnati, Abe rented a hotel suite in town and he had 25 men with him. The night before the game, he was seen standing on the table in the lobby, taking all bets against the Reds. Thousands of dollars changed hands that night. The problem was the players hadn't seen a dime yet. Burns had an agreement with the players that they would receive $20,000 after each loss. Burns made a separate arrangement with Eddie Seacoat. Seacoat was scheduled to be the starting pitcher in Game 1, and Eddie wanted all of his $10,000 up front, or there was no deal. Burns went to Abe Attell and told him he needed money for the players, but Abe told him it was all out on bets. Everything looked like it would fall apart. But on the morning of Game 1, Eddie Seacoat found $10,000 under his hotel room pillow. Eddie Seacoat and Chick Gandil have recruited 6 more players to join them in throwing the series. Center fielder Happy Felch, pitcher Lefty Williams, shortstop Buck Weaver, shortstop Swede Reisberg, superstar outfielder Shoeless Joe Jackson, and third baseman Fred McCullen, who found out about the fix and demanded to be cut in or he would rat. Back then, the World Series was the best of 9. The first team to 5 wins wins the series. Game 1 was on October 1st, 1919 in Cincinnati. When Eddie Seacoat took the mound for the bottom of the first, he beamed the first batter, Morris Rath, in the back. That was the signal to the gamblers that the fix was in. The Sox were shut out in Game 1. After the game, the players were expecting $20,000, but all they received were excuses from Burns. The next game was the same thing. The Sox lost, but no money. It was all out on bet. The next game would be held in Chicago, and rookie pitcher Dickie Kerr, who was not in on the fix, won his first World Series game by shutting out the Reds 3-0. This sent Abe Attell and Burns into a frenzy. They had lost big. But for Arnold Rothstein, it didn't matter. He bet on the series as a whole, and one loss didn't affect him. The players still had not been paid, but Eddie Seacoat had his money, and he went out in Game 4 and lost again, 2-0. After another loss in Game 5, the players still had not received any money. They realized that they had been double-crossed, and they decided to double-cross the double-crossers. If they couldn't get paid for throwing the series, at least they could play for the winner's share. They got themselves together and played like they were supposed to and won the next 2 games. The series was now 3-4, with the next game to be played in Chicago. Things were getting too close for Arnold's liking. There were rumors that another group of gamblers might be paying the Sox to win. The night before Game 8, several of the players were visited by some hard-faced men from New York. They were told that it would be very bad for them if they won the next game. The next day, the Sox went out to lose 10-5. That was it. Arnold made a fortune. Out of all the players, only Seacoat and Chick Gandil ever made any money. Suspicion started immediately after the series. Comiskey denied that his boys would ever throw the World Series and offered $10,000 to anyone who could prove otherwise. But the rumors persisted, and a grand jury was convened in September of 1920. Abe Attell, Sports Sullivan, Bill Burns, manager Kid Gleason, and 10 players were charged with conspiracy to defraud. Seacoat and Shoeless Joe Jackson admitted their participation but later recanted their statements. The trial started on June 27, 1921 in Chicago. When Burns was brought onto the stand, he implicated Arnold Rothstein as one of the men being behind the fix. Arnold hired a high-powered lawyer and went to Chicago. His lawyer argued successfully that fixing the World Series was not a crime, and even if it was, his client had nothing to do with it. Arnold took the stand. He claimed that he had been invited to be part of the fix, but turned the culprits down emphatically when he met with them in New York at the Astor. The jury returned a verdict of not guilty for all. But the scandal had embarrassed Major League Baseball, and the 8 players were banned from baseball for life. Arnold Rothstein would give an interview that was printed in the papers. He announced that he was retiring from gambling. He said that he was going to sell all of his casinos and focus on real estate and his stable of racing horses. Arnold was looking to the future, but he was far from done. Prohibition went into effect in January 1920, and to Arnold, the smart money was in bootlegging. He was already a millionaire a few times over, but Prohibition would make Arnold Rothstein into a legend. He would not make it to see crime organized, but he laid the groundwork for everything that would come after him. And that's where I have to leave you guys off with. All right, so stay tuned for episode 2. Make sure you bump off that subscribe button, break that thumb, ring that bell, set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. Check out the merch store, get yourself something nice. Join the Patreon or the YouTube membership. If you want to slide an envelope upstairs to the boss to help the channel run smooth, the link is in the description. Thanks to all those current Patreons and members and those who donated. You really help the channel out a lot, and I really appreciate you. So, this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I'll see you in the funnies.